So we are team number 6, and this evidence number 1 takes place in the conflict between the government and Ejército Zapatista Liberal against the injustices that exist between indigenous communities that were not taken into consideration, and they do not have access to some services that are important for them to survive, and their land was taken away from them. And this problem takes place in 1994. So we're now going to present the perspectives from the ones that were involved in this conflict. At first, we have indigenous communities that fight to balance the rights between the government and the indigenous communities, and these rights have been taken away from them since colonization days. And indigenous communities have been a victim of historical discrimination and segregation. Since colonization, a dominant culture was imposed over them and were obligated to put their own culture in a second place. They are being judged and considered as inferior or sometimes ignorant, and they have a lack of opportunities. They suffer from discrimination and segregation. And as indigenous communities, they are requesting that government needs to consider them as part of their society, as an important role for the society, and they need to end with social privilege, discrimination, and they need to be taken as equals.
And well, here in the government's perspectives, we have like the evolution that the government had over this commotion. And well, first, they had the lack of attention and interest on the necessities of the indigenous communities, also the priority to development and progression, and a reduced budget. But after the commotion, the government had another response that is, well, they asked for apologies from the indigenous communities, and also they suppress indigenous community commotion by locking them up. And well, the last thing they did was to have a truce with indigenous communities as a result of international pressure that, well, this point is going to be developed in the next slide.
So in the point of view of the international organizations, what is like the main goal for them is to maintain the peace and also to preserve the cultural diversity. The international organizations play the role of mediators. They try to find a truce between both parties, promoting human rights and listen to both sides of the story. Now, in the intercultural dialogue, it is important to have mutual respect and communication. It is important also to create an environment of empathize and also to understand each point of view. Here, it's also important to understand the limitations for both parts of the problem. For example, when we start talking, we have a lot of different proposals, but we understand that these proposals cannot be done because there was some limitation. For example, in the case of the government, there was a budget limitation, and it's important to yield the proposals.
And well, for the modern state to have to reach the equity and equality level, it has to be developed a lot of things. And well, we have it here in bullets. First, in mind, you have to, well, the modern state have to make a decolonization, that is promoting indigenous languages. Also service programs to keep up with the necessities of each community. And then we have the diffusion campaign about the historical and cultural value that indigenous communities present. Also scholarship and educational programs for the community, the indigenous people have access to this basic necessity. Also, we have the county translation of scholar textbooks as a social service. That is because usually the books that are given in the schools, they are in Spanish. So for them to be considered, it has to be translated, and that will be a part of also the decolonization process. Also including indigenous people in political positions because they know what are their necessities. They can speak up for their people. And last but not least, we have the construction of a medical center. And for it to work, it has to be given first aid training to indigenous people, and also take into account the economic contribution to ensure the complete functioning of Fish Medical Center.
So now, as we have seen in our classes, sometimes law is created by the dominant people and seem to exclude certain social groups, in this case, the indigenous communities. And they are not considered as having the same rights. So now we are proposing that our constitution should have an should assign a budget for projects to help indigenous communities. And we notice that sometimes money are not designated to these indigenous communities. And now we know that they are important and we should take them into consideration while assigning a national budget. And now we, we also propose to create an association that ensure the accomplishment of these agreements that were mentioned before. And as my teammate says, not just mentioning and putting them on the law, but we have to make consciousness that they have to be done. And also we have to respect indigenous lands. And we consider that their land is their territory. And sometimes when other people try to construct or industrialize these territories, indigenous communities should be taken into consideration while taking this decision that if they should industrialize this zone or not. And if they decide to do so, they have to give some money to this community because we have to respect that it's their environment and their territory and they should make their decisions in their place.
Now, talking about diversity and culture, we understand that the first thing to achieve a more open-minded society is to get involved in the culture and to recognize the diversity and all the cultural value that these communities apport to the Mexican society. So we think that it's very important to do this through education and to create some educational programs in schools to get to know more about the indigenous culture and how they are part of our patrimonium.
And yeah, as a conclusion, we promote that each culture has their own identity and are equally valuable. So we should not impose an homogeneous culture, but we have to respect others' perspective. And we came to this conclusion because different is not a synonym of bad. So we should have to respect our different cultures and we have to appreciate them.
Also, we understand that we have to fight ethnocentrism and we have to create awareness of the value of the indigenous culture, as I said before, and also to understand the importance of a diverse society.
And we have as the last point, pro-party culturalism point of view, that is respecting others' culture, taking into consideration universal rights, and also to be adaptable. We came to these conclusions, like solutions, after we made all these analyses of this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.